My basic thesis at the very beginning was that this was a highly lethal virus that was highly infectious and that it would spread rapidly. And the only way to reduce patient death and suffering and disease efficiently was going to be to identify repurposed drugs and use existing medical treatment modalities in order to treat disease and prevent death. That was the starting point. And that was the focus up until I kind of got sucked into my objections about the medical ethics, let's say failure of informed consent, and the issues around the novel, quote, vaccine product that was based on discoveries, inventions that I had made back when I was 28. Words were redefined and weaponized in a variety of different ways, not the least of which was the definition of the term anti-vaxxer was modified in Webster to mean, and I know many true anti-vaxxers, many of them hate me because I've worked on vaccine development. They're some of my biggest detractors, putting it gently. We call them haters, but there has long been a core of people that are just adamantly opposed to any vaccination. But Webster's chose to redefine the term as anyone who did not endorse vaccine mandates. And so suddenly in the stroke of a pen or the press or updating of a web page, we redefined certainly the plurality of the U.S. population to be anti-vaxxers, which now something north of 50%, perhaps 60% of the population identified as are meet the criteria of being anti-vaxxers. And if fentanyl deaths on a daily basis in the United States exceed the peak of the COVID crisis, deaths that were over assigned, over attributed to COVID because of the perverse incentives. But, we were getting those numbers of 300, 450 a day. That's kind of routine for fentanyl deaths. But we don't have a national all of government response to fentanyl incursion across the border. So I think it is, and this leads to the conclusion that there's a lot of financial incentives that are driving many of these agendas.
Today's December 15, 2024, and I'm honored to have with me Dr. Robert Malone. He's a man almost who needs no introduction, but perhaps I'll let him self-introduce. What's your, you've come to prominence during the COVID era. What was your basic thesis going through it in the early days, and what's your kind of retrospective view of what happened?
My basic thesis at the very beginning was that this was a highly lethal virus that was highly infectious and that it would spread rapidly. And the only way to reduce patient death and suffering and disease efficiently was going to be to identify repurposed drugs and use existing medical treatment modalities in order to treat disease and prevent death. That was the starting point. And so I launched and focused on pulling together a team, getting it funded in various ways, and moving forward with repurposed drug discovery, identification, initial clinical trials. And then as things progressed, particularly with the combination of celecoxib and famotidine, with or without ivermectin, to get multi-arm clinical trials set up and funded. We used a patient-centered outcomes research novel tool that we built, and that was the focus up until I kind of got sucked into my objections about the medical ethics, let's say failure of informed consent, and the issues around the novel, quote, vaccine product that was based on discoveries, inventions that I had made based back when I was 28. And I found myself in a world in which there had been little explanation or background given to people. They were basically, patients were just told, take this and shut up, and don't ask questions, and just believe us, trust us that these are safe and effective products under emergency use authorization that had failed to pass normal regulatory steps and robust clinical trials before being implemented. And so I got sucked into this whole vortex of uh, objecting, as I mentioned, to the ethics initially, and then being asked, because of my background and expertise and being one of the only ones with that profile of regulatory affairs, clinical research, uh, and fundamental molecular biology, virology understanding of the quote vaccine technology. I was one of the only that understood all this, that was willing to criticize it, and so that's what kind of launched me into uh, um, B-list celebrity status.
Yeah, well, you'll always be on my A list. Um, I think there's a kind of a pantheon of people, plethora of pandemologists. If I want to keep a literally, public pundits who publicly proclaim the panic pervade by the popular. Anyway, I'll stop there. But
Yeah, two APs. I'm getting confused.
yeah, so I think you and Peter McCulloch and others were reasonably willing to stand up and kind of yell stop. A couple of things that, as you were talking, came to my sense. Keep putting air quotes around vaccine, and I'm wondering why that is. I mean, is this a vaccine? You're obviously intimately familiar and one of the founders, in a sense, of the concept of mRNA transjection, or whatever you want to call it. Um, tell us why you put the quotes around vaccine in this case.
A good case can be made. Well, these absolutely are gene therapy products. That was something that was um, uh, there was an intentional campaign to discredit that, but that's in fact the case. And I think I'm credibly positioned to say so. When I wrote the initial invention disclosures in '87, I was working in one of the leading gene therapy labs at the Salk Institute, pursuing a PhD focused on gene therapy technology. And this absolutely involves the transfer of foreign genetic material into a patient. And that was, basically the whole genesis of this was the epiphany that I had that although gene therapy per se that I had committed my life to, I thought this was going to be my career as a physician scientist. I became aware that it was not tenable because of the problems of uh, the tech, any gene therapy tech, eliciting basically a foreign body response, an immune response to the transferred genetic information in the protein encoded. And so using gene therapy for the original intended purpose of correcting inborn errors of metabolism in pediatric populations, envisioned by Ted Friedman, wasn't going to work because of the immune response against the foreign protein. So the epiphany was, well, let's make lemonade out of lemons. And if the problem is immune response, well, then let's use this to generate an immune response. And there's a whole, cascade of logic around that, having to do with mimicking natural infection through a gene transfer technology. In terms of, so it is a gene therapy tech. It was created as a gene therapy tech in a gene therapy laboratory uh, by a gene therapy researcher. as was the case with the adenovirus vector, which was the J&J product. Everybody
That
always
was actually going to be my second question. Like, how does it differ if we use the adenovirus vector as proxy versus kind of taking out the middleman?
Yeah, so ad vectors are one. Actually, ad vectors is a technology that was just coming online when I was doing this work. And the senior postdoc in Inder's lab, uh, Dinko Valerio, was working on that, and he's actually the one that founded the company Crucell that got sold to J&J. It was the origin of the tech. So it's strangely, both of these platforms trace back to exactly the same laboratory at exactly the same time. Dinko even credited me way back when with persuading him to turn his focus on to genetic vaccines instead of gene therapy, based on the arguments I'd made. So the other reason is because particularly the COVID mRNA products, are they were licensed or market authorized by the FDA as mitigating infection, not mitigating disease severity. And they have failed at that, but they've mostly been promoted as basically as kind of a hybrid prophylactic therapeutic. They're not clearly, the time has shown, unfortunately. I mean, let's wind back. Wouldn't it all have been better if these had been effective and safe as they were promoted to be, and had reduced the risk of patients becoming infected and transmitting the virus to others? I think it just from a humanitarian standpoint, as physicians, we should be able to agree that that would have been a good thing if that had been the case. And unfortunately, it didn't. We were told that that was the case, but it wasn't. It wasn't true. It wasn't supported by clinical data, and it didn't turn out to be the case. So they kind of pivoted to what the data would support early on, which was that the products to some extent mitigated disease severity. So that's more of a therapeutic endpoint rather than a prophylactic endpoint.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so if you go through the historic definitions of a vaccine, as opposed to the kind of jury-rigged, let's call it post-mortem version.
Yeah, like the postmodern, postmodern.
Yeah, they didn't meet the criteria. So hence the air quotes.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you for the clarification. Yeah, no, I think it's gone through a funny period. You know, vaccine, the original term refers, as I'm sure you know, but perhaps our listeners don't, vaccinia, which is cowpox. The same word in Spanish is vaca for cow. And so vaccine refers to cows, I guess, which is kind of funny when we think about herd immunity and herds of cows. Anyway, but it was given to prophylax against smallpox, and even I guess George Washington's troops, they didn't call it vaccination back then, but they would take a I don't know, needle or a pin or something to poke somebody who had smallpox, cowpox, whether it was a cow or not, I don't know, and they would, in a sense, pop somebody. Puncture the skin to put this small cowpox in to prevent against the congener smallpox, which was worse for humans. But along the way, all this was done prophylactically. And I'm not sure the Greek how that works, what phylacto means, but it means in advance. And so we kind of went to a formulation, again, kind of what I call postmodern, postmoderna, of having this kind of applied ad lib, ad infinitum, and as quote unquote boosters, when in fact the original SARS-CoV-2 had left the scene. And this was kind of an anachronism, which just seemed to me like a like a Dr. Seussian, I don't know if you know Monkey, what's his name, Monkey McBean, within the Sneetches, kind of rolling out devices for his own benefit rather than for the use of the Sneetches in this case, or in our case, the populace. It seems like the definitions changed of what herd immunity was and what a vaccine was, and the concept of applying these after the fact seems strange. I wonder if you have a comment
That
about
would
that. When they
strange.
kind of
Strange would be
dilute,
the most generous way we could
yeah,
put it.
that's I'm trying to be quasi objective here.
Yeah. So, I mean, it is what it is. It's what we've been through, and uh, and clearly, words were redefined and weaponized in a variety of different ways. Not the least of which was the definition of the term anti-vaxxer was modified in Webster to mean. And I know many true anti-vaxxers. Many of them hate me because I've worked on vaccine development. They're some of my biggest detractors, putting it gently. We call them haters, but um, that there has long been a core of people that are just adamantly opposed to any vaccination. But Webster's chose to redefine the term as anyone who did not endorse vaccine mandates. And so suddenly, in the stroke of a pen or the press, we or updating of a web page, we redefined certainly the plurality of the U.S. population to be anti-vaxxers, which Del Bigtree took as a huge win for him and his operation. No, quite seriously, he was celebrating that now something north of 50%, perhaps 60% of the population identified as are meet the criteria of being anti-vaxxers. So strange times, and hence the two books, "The Lies My Government Told Me," and the second book, "PsyWar: Enforcing."
Yeah, I'd like to pull that up. Just give me a second here. PsyWar, Robert Malone, and I assume you're somewhat related to Jill Malone.
Yes, we've been married for 45 years, and we were high school sweethearts. She's a PhD in biotechnology and public policy. She actually wrote her thesis on the NIH peer review system, and then after that, did a internship with Research America, which is a kind of a lobbying research advocacy organization in the DC area. And then both of us completed a postgraduate fellowship at Harvard University in global clinical research.
So tell us the premise of PsyWar, PsyOps War, and I noticed the forward by General Michael Flynn.
So it's easier to explain the genesis. And the term PsyWar is not something that we invented. It's a term that's the U.S. military psychological warfare unit in Fort Bragg, which is the kind of the lead unit in the Army PsyWar. It's the lead division in the Army PsyWar infrastructure. Many of them are, matter of fact, most of the infrastructure and capabilities and personnel in U.S. Army PsyWar capabilities are in the Army Reserve, and there's a very large operation, as you might well imagine, at Moffett Field, basically adjacent to Silicon Valley. So the genesis of this was, we all. I'll put it this way: we all have our defense mechanisms, right? You, as a physician, you understand that well. And you understand that there are some defense mechanisms that are more adaptive and some that are less adaptive. And one of them that is kind of midway towards more adaptive is intellectualization. And that happens to be, no surprise, my go-to defense mechanism. And as I started speaking out and received so much hate and coordinated weaponized media against me and so many other things, all of the deplatforming, etc. Having been through multiple outbreaks before, including named pandemics, and being a bit of a specialist in this, I'd never encountered anything like this in the past. And I kind of Jill and I, since we'd started writing on Substack before the Rogan hit happened, that kind of transformed everything. We had started writing about what we were observing, not just among ourselves, but many other physicians and scientists. We could see they were experiencing similar things. So it wasn't anything particularly targeting me necessarily, but rather more general. And writing essays about this, writing essays about the law having to do with defamation and slander, etc. It just is an attempt to make sense out of what we were experiencing. As I say, that's my kind of go-to, is to intellectualize things. And as time progressed, and it became clear that this is before the Twitter files and those various disclosures that happened after Elon Musk purchased Twitter. And reflecting back on my own experience, particularly in servicing one of my clients in my consulting business, that was called Behavior Matrix, that produced technology and software that's used by most of the military grade social media platforms, which is to say all of them, including Twitter, and how that worked. I started kind of diving deeper into the literature of information control and propaganda, particularly propaganda. And as I did so, I encountered peer-reviewed and academic work having to do with fifth generation warfare, which is now integrated as part of the doctrine of warfare in NATO. It's a core component of NATO warfare doctrine now, hybrid warfare, they call it, where you combine both kinetic and psychological warfare. And as I read through this and began to grapple with the meaning of what I was learning, I realized that what I and those around me and the rest of the world really had been experiencing was something much deeper than just these instances of bot farms and trollery and coordinated corporate media messaging, defamation, attacks, slander, etc. It was much broader and much deeper than that, and that it was all consistent with this military grade technology that had been developed largely at US and UK in collaboration, and really in many ways with the UK leading it in areas like nudge technology. And so we began writing about this more and more on Substack. And after we finished up and published, and I did the rounds to promo the initial book, Lies My Government Told Me, we kind of turned to what's the next one. And Jill, my partner, decided that she was going to collect all of these various essays that we had written that related to psychological warfare and build a table of contents around them and structure them. And as that project kind of started to mature, it was clear that we had a major volume, and it was something that didn't exist. I don't want to do stuff that other people have published. That the Michael Flynn, which is why I asked Flynn to write the foreword, had after I had started lecturing on psychological warfare, which was another key moment, particularly a lecture in Stockholm, where I was speaking to about 500 or 600 people, and I decided to deploy, lay out the basic thesis that what we had been experiencing was psychological warfare based on military-grade technology that had been weaponized against the citizens of Western nation states. And the audience was gobsmacked with that. They were just stunned. And I realized that I had touched a raw nerve. And so, we continued to pursue this, continued our investigations and our efforts to comprehend. And that eventually led to the book and rewriting a lot of that older stuff and structuring it and then filling in the blanks with new chapters. And that's what gives rise to the book. The intent of the book is to help the reader to better comprehend the nature of this technology, who's deploying it, and what their overall objectives are, which is a hard thing. It's the big lift that I used to get all the time on podcasts. Basically, the question, who's the puppet master? And that's become more clear over time. But the book is partially an answer to that question and is, as I say, designed to help the reader along uh, to understand the nature of this tech, how powerful it is, how it integrates with many things that they experience in their lives, like surveillance capitalism, the business model that drives Silicon Valley, like psychological bioterrorism, the process and phenomena that underlies the constant existential messaging threat and death messaging regarding a whole bunch of topics, of which infectious disease is one, climate change is another one. Uh, um, and so this, once you can see through and understand the tech and a lot of these things, like a term that's overused these days and often misused, uh, the limited hangout. People are, for some reason, there's now a huge push to weaponize limited hangout, and it's being tossed around all the time and deployed against people uh, as a kind of an aggressive thing, replacing the former generalized attack term, controlled opposition. Now, instead of accusing people of being controlled opposition, they're being accused of being a limited hangout or promoting limited hangouts. I was just with Brett Weinstein yesterday and the day before, and he's getting that all the time. It's being deployed against Bobby Kennedy, many people. So once you understand the nature of these terms, their origins, things like Operation Mockingbird, the history of the involvement of the CIA in manipulating media and information, then in the nature of propaganda, the structure that goes back to Bernays' classic book, which was really quite naive in retrospect. For instance, he thought that the press would never act on behalf of the government. Clearly, that one was a miss. But things like the basic structure of white, gray, and black propaganda. Once you understand this language and you understand the structure and terms, the methods, then it becomes much more transparent. Just like as we have all grown up here in the West, particularly in the United States, with Madison Avenue and their various methods of selling us everything from lipstick to hamburgers to automobiles to presidents. Uh, we have grown up with this, and many of us are much more resistant to variety of different types of marketing methods. And so the hope is that by helping people to see this new iteration, this more advanced version, in how it's done and who does it, then they can become a lot more resistant to it and hopefully better able to think for themselves.
A genuine inoculation, a genuine vaccination. Well, I suppose it would be a metaphoric vaccination, but a genuine realization of what's out there. I mean, kind of, the educated populace. Limited hangout. Am I wrong? Was that a Nixonian era term?
Well, it was certainly notoriously used in the context of the Watergate break-in and the modified limited hangout. I think Ehrlichman had something to do with that. So the term limited hangout is a common term in the intelligence community. And once you understand it, this is for instance, if you had read or your listeners are familiar with the recently published select subcommittee report after 2 years of investigation on the coronavirus pandemic, is the formal title. Many note that there are strange gaps in that report. There are a number of things that were covered that many basically respond to as, well, we already knew that, but it's nice to see the government admitting it. And then there's a whole lot of things that aren't addressed at all, including, for instance, vaccine harms. And but there's many other nuances. If you've been following the bouncing ball here and you go through that report with a fine tooth comb, you're going to find all sorts of stuff that's misrepresented, basically spun is as in ways that are aligned with a variety of political and economic interests, including in some ways aligned with the pharmaceutical industry, which seems like a paradox. When you see a document that comes out or a Washington Post article, I mean, I picked up on one of these on Bannon a couple of years ago when people weren't generally aware of the term limited hangout that had been posted in the Washington Post that Natalie Winters was all excited about, and Steve was excited about. Oh my God, they're admitting this finally, whatever the thing was. And I said, no, this is a limited hangout. They're agreeing to something that we already all know as a way to distract you from the things that aren't being acknowledged that we suspect. And we all become so engrossed with the shiny object that we neglect to ask the questions, yeah, but what about this? And the Select Committee report has a lot of the hallmarks of being a intentional limited hangout that, among other things, is predicated on the thesis that Operation Warp Speed was a success. And so as you read through it, there's, here's a little nuance. As you read through it, EcoHealth Alliance and DASIC are clearly the fall guy. And I had known this from some of my colleagues on the inside in DC that were working for various senators in an investigative role, that it looked like EcoHealth and DASIC were going to be structured as the fall guys in this, rather than Fauci and Barrick. Ralph Barrick is not even mentioned in that report. And despite the extensive comments about the origin of the virus having been genetically engineered and emerging from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, they said absolutely nothing about Barrick and University of North Carolina. And that's been the case all the way through. They didn't ask any questions about that. They didn't ask him in to testify, et cetera, et cetera. So this when you see this kind of thing, that is evidence of basically an intelligence-like psyop in which you're being fed certain information that's already in the public sphere that you already really know as a way, but it's being presented as if, well, now it has the formal entrepreneur of some legitimate source as opposed to prior speculative coming out of the likes of you and me. That everybody latches onto that and says, oh, great, look at that. They finally admitted it. And doesn't notice all the things that aren't being addressed that logically would have been addressed if this was truly an open and transparent effort to seek truth.
Yeah. I limited hangout is in a sense kind of like what a magician does. Magic isn't magic.
Precisely.
Magic
It's
isn't
the
magic.
old razzmatazz. Look over here. Look over here. Don't look at what I'm doing with my other hand.
Yeah. And it reminds me of, I've kept the Nancy Pelosi clip that she goes, something like the roll-up smear.
Yeah, the roll-up smear. We talked about the roll-up smear in the book. Yep.
But it
actually smear, once you know roll-up smear, you can see it all over the place.
Yeah, it actually sounds like a good item, maybe at Panera. If you make it a roll-up smear,
yeah,
it would be really kind of nice. One of those items with pita bread and a little bit of I don't know, camembert or something like that. You can make up a roll-up smear. But tell us, what is the roll-up smear? How does it play into kind of the last electoral cycle, the E. Jean Carroll and a whole bunch of other things that are kind of thrown out there, get from magicians to, gangsters, throwing, I don't know, nails outside their car so that the police don't follow you, whatever. I mean, so much of this is kind of like Tom and Jerry and Keystone Cops and whatnot. It seems so blatant and obvious in retrospect, but
Once
how
you
did it
know
play
it,
out?
okay, but it's a standard go-to for corporate media. They use it all the time. And it is at the core of the cascade of events that are um, the the standard intel community spycraft that we saw deployed with the COVID crisis. What was originally called by Yuri Bezmenov, I think is the proper pronunciation, this Russian, former Russian intelligence agent that was a specialist in biowarfare, that gave an interview in 2017 about this spycraft that he called information bioterrorism, but I call psychological bioterrorism, another chapter in the book. And he rolls out a series of steps that are used again and again. And once you know them, you can see them all around you. You can see that it's being deployed routinely now in the context of avian influenza. And it was used with monkeypox, and it was attempted with leprosy in Florida. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. It's one of those things. So the wrap-up smear operates in a very similar fashion. The information ecosystem is seeded with some attack or smear or defamation article or storyline, a narrative that's seeded into the general awareness. Could be through social media now, TikTok or whatever. But historically, it was done through a less prominent and often marginal publication. So a kind of C-level publication might come out and say that Randy Bach, there's lots of discussion that Randy Bach has actually been having sexual encounters with his patients. And we were unable to get Randy Bach to comment on this, but it appears to be a serious concern. Or another, closer to home, the accusations that I am a spreader of misinformation. Or another one that was used again and again was I had no real role in the invention of the mRNA technology.
I see that one over and over again. I had an article in Brownstone I shared with you, the Dr. Fauci's DNA of caring, and that's almost your middle
So
name.
these narratives are injected typically from a media source that is not well vetted. It's not a mainstream high level. It might be coming from a one of these cutout NGOs, fake grassroots, so astroturf organizations like the Center for Countering Digital Hate, etc. And so it's injected into the dialogue, and then that gets amplified by some higher level media source that is citing the original source. So Rolling Stone says blah 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 blah, or Atlantic Monthly, or Wired magazine, or there's a bunch of these that have really close ties to, let's say, the official government narratives, uh, and then you get, once this is out, it's come in from some really not very credible source, but then it's been picked up and repeated by some source that has kind of intermediate level legitimacy. And then you'll get the big boys come in: Washington Post, New York Times. The New York Post doesn't do this, but these larger heavy hitters will come in, and Google will pick it up. It'll get put on Wikipedia. Wikipedia basically is a master at the wrap-up smear. the people that manipulate and edit the various postings in Wikipedia. And then the New York Times or the Washington Post will come out with an article that says, well, Dr. Malone has, or Randy Bach has
Yeah,
um,
we
uh,
don't want to repeat that too many times. Put
has
it in the
has
Google algorithm.
or Robert Malone has repeatedly this, that, and the other
Right.
publications have all noted that Robert Malone is a
Yeah.
spreader of misinformation. Therefore, he's a spreader of misinformation. Well, that's the wrap up.
Yeah. It's all done. It's actually, as you're speaking, it reminds me a lot of the mRNA, gene therapy, except on the body politic, kind of writ large. It's basically, you're making a human-oriented vaccine into the knowledge base of our, body politic immune system. You're putting
It is
something in.
it is a good metaphor, I think, to think about. Well, or perhaps another metaphor might be the virus itself. We use that term. The information goes viral. This
That's
particular
actually
narrative goes viral.
That's pretty funny.
Uh,
Well,
um,
virus itself, I think, just comes from the word viri, which is strength, like virile. So it's kind of like a force. I'm not sure who came up with the term virus for that thing, which nobody knew what they were. You probably are more expert on this than I am. The derivation of virus. I've actually studied another virus. Which I only found out today. Coincidentally, you were involved with partially. I'm a party of one in having debunked the relationship between Zika, which is a real virus, and microcephaly, which is a real phenomenon. Um, but you know, but as far as like reading the history of dengue, which is Zika is a dengue virus. For long they don't really know how long dengue was in the Americas because they didn't know about viruses. Until the 20th century. Maybe you can kind of fill us in the timeline of when viruses were figured out, and how they've kind of in a sense gone viral within us as a psywar, and in a sense kind of an exaggeration at times to kind of keep us on edge, as you were mentioning with climate and whatnot. We hear about Ebola. We've had so many Ebola scares, and I'm not saying Ebola is a great thing. I don't
well, now
want
it's Marburg, right? We got a kind of a variation on the theme with another filovirus.
Yeah, and
called Marburg.
actually they coincide. In my researching the book, the climate narrative coincides with the virus narrative, because the concept is, the climate's getting so bad, and these weird, bad, crazy tropical things are going to come attack you in Washington D.C. and
that
Paris.
absolutely has been part of the weaponized fear, and Peter Hotez is a major purveyor of that narrative.
Yeah, he's actually at the tropical, isn't he? Was he at Baylor? But
yeah,
I think he coincides with kind of this tropical institute they have down there.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's kind of always been his shtick. He used to be ahead of the Sabin, but something happened and they kicked him out. And he used to be in D.C., by the way.
Maybe we could start a wrap-up smear on him. What happened to Sabin?
Yeah, I was never able to get to the bottom of it, but clearly something did. Right. Origin of viruses. The literature indicates, and the genetic, now that we have a large number of genomes from a variety of sources, you can trace the origin of animal viruses back through insects, and then from there back to plants. So it appears that what we have is these self-replicating genetic information packages that are parasitic, right? They don't have all the tools they need to be alive and to self-replicate, but they can parasitize on cells and co-opt the cellular machinery that they don't contain in their own genome to replicate themselves and spread. And this appears to have originated in plants. No big surprise, at least based on the genetics. There are certainly plenty of bacteria. Maybe it goes back even more to bacterial prokaryotic systems. The virus deniers often attack me fairly routinely. Most of them I block now, but um, my responses to them was, well, have you ever seen a bacteriophage? Uh, that this is the viruses that infect bacteria. And my other response to that crowd is, well, find somebody with oral herpes and go lick them, and
Yeah.
then get back to me in a couple of months.
or share blood with somebody with HIV, or
Yeah.
hang around,
Yeah.
or wonder why everybody in the kindergarten comes up with the sniffles within days of each other.
Well, that's because of their, that they have some homeostasis aberrancy. They go on and on to backflips to. But in any case, the literature teaches that viruses go back millennia, back through the history of life, and these parasitic nucleic acids, which is what they are. Um, uh, kind of like Richard Dawkins' um, ideas about genetics, the parasitic gene. That's basically what they are, and a case can be made that they may have gone bacterial to plant, plant to insect, and then insect vectors into animals. And at each time where they're jumping, not just species, but also large phylogenetic jumps like that, they have to acquire new functionality. But since all life is got some consistency in terms of the basics uh, cell biology and replication of genetic information, that it's not too much of a stretch to hop from one to the other. And so that's that. In terms of the logic of the emergence of tropical diseases, particularly viral diseases in North America, the thesis is, and it has merit, that as in whether or not, I think the key distinction with climate change is anthropomorphic climate change, human caused climate change, ostensibly due to CO2 levels. That thesis I don't buy into. I'm much more aligned with the climate is always changing, and it's multifactorial, and there are big picture issues that drive climate change, some of which are kind of an emergent property of a complex system of weather, and others involve solar activity, etc. So in any case, climate does change,
Yeah,
and
I've noticed that oftentimes when that big light bulb in the sky, you called it the sun, I think, when it's out, for bigger fractions of the day, it gets hotter. I've decided to call it summer because it happens some of the time.
Yeah. So periodically, very difficult to predict though. But so as we are, if we are, to the extent that we're having warming in various parts of the United States compared to historic norms, we will see environmental change, and in particular, we'll see insects, and particularly mosquitoes and mosquito species like Aedes aegypti. That this is, the kind of the tiger stripe mosquito that now has moved up the eastern seaboard. There's no question that that's happened. Anybody that spends any time out around lakes, etc., is seeing a larger mosquito that is Aedes aegypti that they didn't used to see if they're old enough, like me. And that happens to be a species that can support replication and spread of many of these dengue-related viruses. And so, yes, we will see this at some point. We will see these more tropical diseases migrating north, and that's highly, entirely predictable. And so, but is it a major public health threat? Are you going to see it in large quantities? One of the kind of the underpinning lies that are cited by the vaccine advocacy community in pharma is that vaccines are responsible for the major improvements in public health that one has observed over the last 150 years. And the truth is that that's not so true. That polio and many other things, the reduction in cases has a lot more to do with hygiene methods and water purity than it has to do, because you can look at the decline in incidence in many of these infectious diseases and infectious disease outbreaks, and they precede
population density, kind of like tenement.
Well, that's a complex one also, the population density question. But that would be inversely related, because we've gotten more dense, and yet we've seen less of these. A lot of these outbreaks used to be, as you mentioned, George Washington. They used to be routine, and back at around the bracket of 100 years around the founding of the country. And now they're not. Polio is a notable example that is largely the decline in incidence of polio cases preceded the deployment of the vaccine. And that's the case with many of these. So in any case, is there a probability that we will see yellow fever migrating up into the Rio Grande Valley? Well, yes. I think that's and southern part of Florida. It's a tropical environment, and it's getting more tropical. There's evidence to support that for whatever reason, and so you'll see that. And this is, the question is, are we overreacting to it? And how much of a public health threat does it really represent, particularly in the face of other public health threats that we face, like, for instance, fentanyl. If fentanyl deaths on a daily basis in the United States exceed the peak of the COVID crisis, deaths that were over assigned, over attributed to COVID because of the perverse incentives. But, we were getting those numbers of 300, 450 a day. That's kind of routine for fentanyl deaths. But we don't have a national all of government response to fentanyl incursion across the border. So I think it is and this leads to the conclusion that there's a lot of financial incentives that are driving many of these agendas.
I think I agree with that. I think there are always going to be these little silos that get their money, and they push what they have, and if their thing happens to go away, they push it even harder. We've had. I want to bring up maybe quickly, if I can, 2 points. I mean, we've had vast reductions in mortality from a variety of cancers, and yet the groups, the nonprofits, the NGOs that promote this, they'll never back down. They kind of double down. Breast cancer is a bad thing. I don't want to have it for anybody I know and whatnot, and any patient and whatnot, and nobody wants to have that. But the actual mortality from breast cancer has gone down. But when you see some of the things out there, it's always fear mongering. It's like 1 in 8 women are going to get breast cancer. Well, yes, if they don't die from anything else and live to 120, you'll find it in that number. But as far as like women dying from it, it's a much lower number.
Yeah, that's really another example of psychological bioterrorism. They are promoting fear narratives, existential narratives. The most powerful psychological manipulation tool is fear of death. And so the weaponization of the fear of death to support a variety of agendas is fairly common. Once you kind of your eyes open up and you're aware that it's done, it's basically a very powerful marketing technique.
Yeah. And the other one I was going to bring up is the kind of I don't know if anybody's really named it a pandemic, but if you looked at, let's say there was some bad virus, zombie apocalyptic virus number A, and or letter A, and it was blighting the population such that your population was decreasing in a matter of 10 years by 20%. That would be a massive problem. But places, the birth rate of, I think, South Korea is shrinking, and I think it's like 0.8 children per woman, which will, if South Korea stays insular and whatnot, would diminish the population by, I haven't done the math, but say like by 20% in 20 years. If you had a virus that did that, it would be like, oh my God, we have to stop that thing because it's decimating. To use the Roman word, the population, which is 10%, and or double decimating in this case. But people, in public health, they tend to just kind of look at certain things. It's kind of like the cat with the laser. They look at tiny bright things where they
Good metaphor.
but they're not really looking at the kind of social fabric, which is really a greater determinant of health, direction, quality, and joy. To use the Kamala term, the joy of life, and a lot of those things are really, my thesis, when I get anointed king, is that a lot of public health should look at health kind of globally. And if you really wanted to say, oh, don't eat a lot of sugar, don't eat this, don't be too fat, don't smoke cigarettes, whatever, you should also say, you should get married, you should go to church, because these things tend to be much greater determinants of longevity and/or the happiness, kind of not just the quality adjusted, but the quality of the quality adjusted life years you have, and that's never done. If you want to actually live long and productively, you should be reasonably discreet. Try to live well, try to help other people, try to be part of community, try to anyway, follow your muse and amuse your followers, and that's never emphasized. Public health, it seems to be kind of like, again, a little bit like the magic thing, kind of this distraction method where you're dealing totally on the fringes of things that are actually affecting our own kind of mental genome, our soul.
Well, agree on that whole thesis, the strange myopia of public health that seems to often align fairly precisely with the interests of the pharmaceutical industry. But moving beyond that observation, the nature of the MPH and the logic underpinning public health is one of my particular axes that I like to grind. And here's the argument. Public health is as taught in the MPH. And remember, you can get a master's in public health without ever having any science, let alone being trained as a physician. The MPH degree is largely a statistical analysis degree, together with some kind of applied statistics having to do with data analysis and data capture. And it's all wrapped around the core thesis of trying to advance the greatest good for the greatest number, which is utilitarianism. And it's very different. It's a population-based utilitarianism. I guess that's a little redundant, but it's a population-based discipline. And one way that I like to illuminate this with folks is if you've ever been exposed to modern warfare strategy or any warfare strategy, you're aware that the battlefield commander faces difficult decisions about sacrificing this brigade or division or that brigade or division to the enemy in order to obtain a tactical or strategic advantage that would benefit the overall army and the overall objectives. And so in battle, you will find that there are groups of soldiers that are quite literally sacrificed. And that is a conscious decision being made on the part of Central Command. the same happens in the context of the public health logic of utilitarianism, the greatest good for the greatest number. And so we find this logic that, and it's the logic that underpins the modern vaccine enterprise almost completely, which is that we will need to tolerate a certain amount of death and damage and disability caused by these products because they have in aggregate a greater positive impact on the overall population. And that is diametrically opposed to the frame of reference of a classical physician, in which the physician's focus is not on the population. The physician's focus should be on that patient, on their patient that's in front of them at that particular time, and what's best for that particular patient. But the MPH disregards all that. It basically amalgamates all of those various perspectives and opinions and just says, we're going to choose this parameter and we're going to optimize around this parameter. And as you point out, we don't take into account all of the other psychosocial and accessory or unintended consequences of focusing just on this parameter. But that's how we're going to make our decision. And so, COVID is bad. And despite the fact that to the extent that there are deaths from the disease, they tend to be clustered in very high-risk groups and people with pre-existing conditions and the elderly that are all suffering from immunosenescence in general. And instead, we're going to say, well, we need to vaccinate everybody with this product that is going to cause adverse events and may cause sudden death or prolonged death from a variety of mechanisms, because we're only focusing on that subset of the population that's at high risk. And we think that we can protect them by getting everybody to take this. And nobody ever did the analysis to say, that's risk benefit. That's classic MPH thinking. And we allow these people to dominate the practice of medicine through the latest stalking horses, the insurance companies. But it's the health maintenance organizations, the large hospital chains, et cetera. They all are driven to these kind of aggregate, overly simplified outcome measures that they use to determine their profitability. And
I kind of feel they also commit the act of journalism, which could either be an epithet or a compliment, depending on how you look at journalism. I have a relative who went to Columbia School of Journalism, and he and I had a heated argument at one point because I don't want to get too far into it, but basically his ultimate premise was that I was mistaken that journalism should be covering the facts, the news, the items, and
that's old school.
You're
was so
more that really it's a matter of moving the populace to this.
So that's advocacy journalism. That's the new, that is, and actually you mentioned Columbia. Columbia is notorious as one of the lead academic advocates for the transformation of the J schools towards advocacy journalism, which, by the way, was capitalized to a significant extent, that transformation towards advocacy journalism, which is what you're describing. Was capitalized by none other than the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. This is something that we documented in our first book, Lies My Government.
I'm going to pull your first book up so people can see it. Yeah, so here we go. Lies My Government Told Me. I'll see if I can center this for people a little bit. So tell us just a little about how this book segues into the other one, or vice versa.
So this, our first book together, Jill and myself, we put out in February of 2020, and it was focused on how to prepare and protect yourself from the novel coronavirus. That was censored by Amazon and taken down in late March. uh, at the insistence, apparently, of the U.S. government. Uh, and then we, same story. We had been writing on Substack and observing what was happening to our peers around us. And a close friend of ours, Mr. Gavin DeBecker, who is the CEO of the company that, for instance, provides security services for Bobby Kennedy and Donald Trump right now, because no one trusts the Secret Service for some reason.
They should rename themselves the Secret Service.
Yeah, right. So Gavin is a friend, and he suggested that we should take what we've been doing and pull it together as a book. And so this was my first major published book. It's published by Skyhorse, which is Tony Lyons, a good friend of Bobby's and of Gavin's. And it also came off of Bobby had asked me early on to provide some information that he incorporated into him and his shadow ghostwriter, incorporated into the real Anthony Fauci. And then he asked me to edit the first and second version of the real Anthony Fauci, which was quite a lift. And so I had done that and done a good job at it. And so Gavin asked me if I would be interested in writing my own book. And I think he might have been either he or Tony Lyons suggested the title. I tried to soften it with the subtitle "Better Future Coming." And the structure of the book was basically, this was my first major, and I'm like, what am I going to do to write a book? How do I structure it? What's the thesis? What's the flow? And I decided to structure it like a physician's encounter with a patient. So diagnosing and treating a patient. And that's the core metaphor underneath the book, that one, which is to start with functionally a history and physical of what had been happening. And so there's a series of essays covering not just my own experiences, but that of Pierre Corey, Merrill Nass, a newspaper owner that had his newspaper turn on him in Chicago, who's also an attorney, and many others. So I gathered these stories together and then wrote the equivalent of a diagnosis where I drew lessons from all of these common stories and said, well, this is what we're seeing in common in all these things between people. And these are the factors that are driving it. And then the final chapters are basically a version of a treatment protocol. What are we going to do about it? What can you do to make yourself better and healthier? So that's the flow of the book. It sold pretty well because it was timely. It's sold better than I think the Lies book. The Lies book is challenging. It comes across to people that haven't really been paying attention that closely as a little bit tinfoil hat. We're talking about the New World Order.
Right. Arguably, the old joke is, are you paranoid if somebody's actually following you?
Or just because I'm paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get me.
Yeah. Flip around. So we've kind of a little bit over rounded the hour, and I'm very much in your debt for having spent the time. It's a Sunday, day of rest, and so I appreciate your putting a little bit of effort.
I'm glad we could finally get it together. My schedule has just been so chaotic, and
well deserved. And so I'd like to just get a chance to ask you a couple, let's say, bullet round questions before we exit. So a couple of them would be, was Omicron, kept as a thing, even though there have always been coronaviruses causing the common cold? Was it kept as an EUA fig leaf for the quote unquote bivalent, kind of this endless sinecure money machine Getting back to my Dr. Seuss analogy, if you Monkey McBean, whatever his name is, you have to know the Sneetches. Anyway,
Right. So at the core of your question, is, was Omicron a natural, a product of natural selection and evolution in the face of the evolutionary pressure of widespread in natural immunity and vaccination, or was it a let's say a laboratory produced product that was deployed potentially through a couple of Chinese diplomats that visited a part of Africa, and then, because that appears to be the point source, or it's certainly consistent with the data from back then, that then spread within Africa and up into the UK in particular, but was first well characterized in South Africa. And this is another one of those conundrums it's almost impossible to resolve. Is it possible that someone, for some reason, deployed a Omicron precursor into the global population? And it's absolutely possible. Is it possible that Omicron and its derivatives reflect a kind of a evolutionary island leap from the preceding alpha delta variants? And that's also possible. And can we in some way go back and reconstruct that? No, we can't, because the true patient zero for Omicron is not able to be detected. And there was obfuscation of the story around these two diplomats because they appear to have had Chinese origins, and that's not politically acceptable, et cetera. So what we can say is that functionally, as I predicted famously on Laura Ingraham around Christmas time that year, when I said that Omicron looked to me like a Christmas present, and that it was going to functionally act because it was less pathogenic and more highly infectious, which, by the way, is the usual evolutionary pathway.
Exactly right. Yeah, that's how
but
things
it had
work.
those characteristics, and that it would spread rapidly in the population, and it would functionally immunize people as if it was a infectious vaccine. And there's a whole nother cluster of hypotheses around Omicron being an intentional infectious vaccine. So I can't, this is all saying you wanted me a bullet. I'm sorry, I'm being more verbose.
No, that's all right.
I can't answer
guess
your question.
The second part of my question would be, given that it is, say, much more like the historic coronavirus common colds in its severity, and it acts like more like a common cold with higher transmission rates, less virulence, was it kind of kept in the COVID-19 nomenclature in order to keep the EUA in place so they could keep pushing the vaccines, which otherwise, absent the EUA, would be pulled off the market?
The U.S. government demonstrated consistently a willingness to disregard the parameters around the EUA. And they really didn't seem to be inconvenienced by the statutory language. I'm, choosing my words.
That's a nice way of saying it. It's
so
kind of a nice way of
I don't
saying
see
regulatory capture.
I don't think they would need to use that kind of a strategy. They are pretty well in your face. We don't care what you say. We don't care what the statute said. We're going to do whatever we want to do, and suck it up, snowflake. And I just don't. It's there's a wealth of hypotheses that we can go through here, and clear intersection of incompetence and nefarious intent.
That's a good title of a book right there.
Yeah. It's impossible to. Yeah, I did a Substack where I kind of laid out a Venn diagram, and then I got all kinds of grief that Kamala Harris loves Venn diagrams. But I laid out a Venn diagram with three big compartments involving complex systems, nefarious intent, uh, and incompetence, and then the intersections between those. And then at the center, I put Hannah Arendt's banality of evil, that all these things interact to give rise to this phenomena that aren't talked about in Eichmann in Jerusalem, the banality of evil that stems from people just following orders and doing their job and not thinking about it.
All right. So here's another bullet question. New administration, new people. The 51, I'm not sure if it's 51 like the CIA operatives, but 51, 53 Nobel Prize, medicine, physiology, whatever, Nobel laureates came out against RFK Jr. Because danger, 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 Will Robinson. And I'm wondering if you had read that, what your thoughts about that are, what your thoughts about, having, in general, an attorney leading HHS, whether that's appropriate, whether that has nothing to do with anything. What are your thoughts about his role? What would be the role in an idealized world of things he gets to accomplish? And I've already heard you say that you're not looking for a role specifically in that administration. But what would be if you could spread your own little magic fairy dust over the whole thing? How would things transpire in your best wishes?
Okay, so my father-in-law used to use the terms the optimum and the pessimum. And, I think he coined pessimum.
Well, there's another good book right there. It's like you got to keep these.
Yeah, the optimum and the pessimum, or at least a Substack. Bobby, clearly there is a concerted campaign to delegitimize and attack and discourage the Senate from approving the nomination of RFK Jr., an attorney who, with a long-standing history, waterkeepers notoriously, and Children's Health Defense, of focusing on large public health issues involving the environment and toxins that people encounter. And remember this, he talked in length about his journey from waterkeepers to Children's Health Defense, and he laid out specifically that the common thread through the both of them is mercury. And it was mercury in fish, and then it was mercury in vaccines. And I think he made the point, I used to speak out against trying to get the mercury out of the fish, and no one called me anti-fish. He when you see this kind of response, you need to ask yourself, what's their angle here? Why is this happening? Whose ox is being gored? What is the conflict of interest that's going on here? And it's not just that RFK Jr. represents a existential threat to the vaccine industry or the pharmaceutical industry or big ag or Bayer, the owner of Monsanto. Remember, Bobby was a key attorney in the case against the trade name is Roundup or glyphosate, and got a major award having to do with the failure of Monsanto to disclose the risks associated with that product. It was originally intended, I think, as a solvent to clean tanks, like stainless steel tanks. It was not designed, and they just observed that when they were deploying it as a cleaner, it would kill all the weeds. And that's the genesis of this product being used in the way that it has, and then it's continued to expand. So Bobby's got this long history. I consider him a friend, but he's not Bitcoin Jesus. He's not a savior of the world. He is a man with his own flaws, and an amazing history. I don't see how I would have been able to survive. I would have been deeply suicidal if my uncle and my father had been assassinated in this way. So a lot of credit to him. And he did go through hard times. He's been a heroin addict.
Yeah, he was quasi. I mean, I'm not saying he was suicidal, but he was kind of on the edges of.
More. Yeah.
Yeah, he was on
So
the edges of human behavior, with his own kind of drug
yeah,
issues.
he had kind of lost his way, I think is a kind way to put it, and maybe lost touch with his soul. But he has, everybody talks about being born again. There's those that do it as a religious conversion, but then there's those that do it as a total transformation of their life and their point of view, and he's one of those people. And he has this substantial, decades-long history of activism in these various sectors, and he has said that he wants to transform NIH, which is the largest funder, I think, globally of biomedical research. He wants to transform it from a drug and disease metaphor to a health metaphor. And all of these Nobel laureates, that's a sacred cow for them. They have, people like David Baltimore have grown up in kind of a pharmaceutical industrial complex world with massive public funding.
Didn't he fudge his data too?
David Baltimore has other sins that have to do with ethics, and a lot of people, my quote mentor, the guy that led to my nervous breakdown in Derverma, was David Baltimore's lead postdoc that did the characterization that got David the Nobel Prize for reverse transcriptase, which there's a strong case to be made that he basically stole those ideas from Howard Temin, who he shared the Nobel with. And there's a long history of accusations of ethical transgressions, both at MIT and then subsequently at Caltech, that have dogged David Baltimore throughout his entire career. But he's just one example. So we can dive into the way that big science runs, but basically most of these guys are the products of big science and the modern scientific pharmaceutical enterprise, and they see the logic that Bobby is advocating for with Make America Healthy Again as deeply threatening. And in fact, it is threatening. If you listen to what's being said by the new candidate for director of NIH, he's talking about pegging funding to universities. The medical schools are all deeply subsidized by NIH, all the research medical schools, particularly all the top tier ones. And they often have 80 to 130% overhead rates. That's just basically an egregious direct subsidy by the taxpayer of their activities. And so the logic that is being promoted, that we're going to tie your ability to get federal money to your openness and transparency, which is one of the things that's being floated. We're going to put a halt on many grants and contracts and redirect those funds either back to the Treasury or to focusing on promotion of health, better nutrition, removing toxicants from the food supply, et cetera. That's deeply threatening to these people that have lifelong investments, and so do all their postdocs in the current metaphor. So no surprise that these folks would object to this, just like the 51 or 52 FBI agents or intelligence community members would write this letter about Hunter Biden's laptop. When you see this kind of concerted lobbying effort, you from a select group of people,
Yeah,
you've
this
got to
is
ask,
qui
where's the
bono.
conflict of interest?
Yeah. Yeah, it's always who benefits, cui bono, um, and it's like a um, they all have their things. They all have their axes to gore, axes to
So,
grind.
so in terms of what I would like to see, I clearly the logic of Make America Healthy Again that has been in part uh, amplified by the Casey and Callie Means book and all the attention that's got has a lot of merit. We absolutely have a unacceptable level of chronic disease in the United States that didn't exist historically, and among those chronic diseases, we have autism, but it's just one of many. Obesity is obviously florid, and all of the downstream effects of obesity. And uh, so uh, I support, and more importantly, than not, I support it. The population found that this was a compelling argument, and it cut across traditional political boundaries. It was very appealing to the young and the old. He was very appealing to my wife calls them granola heads, and MAGA conservatives. Who doesn't want to be healthier? Who doesn't want to live longer? Who doesn't want a country that isn't fat and lazy? Uh, and so I applaud the emphasis, the and I applaud the logic that we should focus on, what Mr. President-elect Trump has given as a mandate to Bobby. It's either 1 year or 2 year horizon. He wants to see measurable outcomes. Well, that's a sense of urgency about advocating for immediate things that can be done to improve national health and reverse this egregious trend to reduction in life expectancy and an accelerating difference in life expectancy between women and men. I mean, that's another one that's not covered is men's health is just really going
Yeah,
down
no. So
compared even to
if
women.
I can just interject, if I may, you know, I'm kind of a minimalist and not quite a nihilist, but I think a fair amount of public health, as to your speaking to your point earlier, the major increases, augmentations in kind of quality of life and longevity were ancillary. We're totally separate, auxiliary, I guess would be a better word.
Yeah, they're not the product of modern pharmaceutical medicine.
Right. Yeah, just
Allopathic
again, running water, better houses. No kind of. We don't have as many fires. We don't have. There's just we don't die from famine. We don't die from war. So everything's gotten better in general, but not all of it's
Well,
like
child health and nutrition. I mean, a lot of that historic um, uh, death rate was dominated by childhood death, which is just significantly driven by nutrition.
Absolutely. So the thing that nobody really spoke about during the first Trump administration. It's kind of a topic near and dear to my heart. I'll maybe elucidate later. But I ran during my medical primary care. I ran ancillary to that a narcotic detox using Suboxone, and I did I consulted the philosopher Goldilocks. I wanted something that wasn't too short and wasn't too long. I didn't want maintenance forever because I think that's not really treatment. That's medicalizing something that's not an actual disease. And I didn't want the 3 to 5, 7, even 10-day detox. So I gave people 3 or 4 months to detox. But so the opioid epidemic and the fallout, literally deaths, people falling out of society from opioids has been one of my major concerns over the last few decades. And it was like crickets. You heard about the opioid epidemic for years during the Obama administration. During the Trump administration, people stopped talking about it. And the reason was because it didn't disappear, but it basically plateaued and started to decline during the good years, the first 3 years of the Trump administration before COVID. And COVID brought about the opposite because, again, men are kind of they're in a sense the canaries in the coal mine of society, and they need to be working, they need to be thriving, for them to avoid
I breed horses, and I can tell you the stallions are much more sensitive than the mares are.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll have to come out and visit because I'd love to see you. You and Chris Martinson are our farmer
I just
philosophers.
saw Chris, for the last couple of days.
Yeah, no, I heard about this brownstone retreat. I haven't been invited to one yet, but but maybe someday. But I enjoyed meeting you at Brownstone. So that's kind of, I think, covers most of what I want to say, except one thing. I did find out just kind of cursorily reading through some of your bio that you had worked a little bit on Zika, and in one of the good ways. I mean, in working on therapeutics, which I think, there's all this, as a side note, one of all these emphases lately on vaccines, and so especially post 1986 NCVIA, and for the last few epidemics to get the vaccines out, and you were working on therapeutics, and again, kind of speaking to the 1980s epidemic of HIV. If people have been waiting for a vaccine for HIV, how many years, 40 years later, they still be waiting. So therapeutics clearly have a place in viral treatment. And you mentioned herpes before. I think herpes reasonably well treated with medication. And we don't need a vaccine for everything. I don't think we need a vaccine for shingles, for instance, which is kind of a herpes virus as well. But I don't know if you're familiar with my work on this, but I'll have to send you a copy if you have any reading window open. But here's a picture of me on the cover of the book. I posed for this recently. That's a striped mosquito. There's actually two different kinds of Aedes aegypti. I think the albopictus is the one that's going north, which doesn't really carry dengue. Just as a side note, it's part of my book here. But I'd love to get your thoughts on this at some later date. We don't have to do it today, obviously, but it's overturning Zika, the pandemic that never was. And I don't know if you have any, closing thoughts on the mysterious disappearance, which is really what my book covers. I think Zika is a real dengue virus, and viruses are real, and viruses cause illness, and so it just so happens that Zika doesn't cause any human illness. And microcephaly is a real but rare phenomenon. It has more, a lot to do with size of heads, and depend how you grade these things. Like who is a terms out of use, but who's a midget, who's not a midget. It depends where you are. You can be, say, 5'2" here and seem like a very short man, and you go to Japan, you're not a short man as much. And so a lot of these things are have to do with the population and whatnot. So I think Zika is real, microcephaly is real, but just the reason that we haven't seen
I became really, really deeply embedded with various leaders in the medical community in Brazil. And if you look at my old publications on Zika, you'll find detailed genetic analysis tracing its migration and evolution. I was right at the tip of the spear and in close correspondence, because I had previously traveled down to Brazil and interacted with people from Biomanguinhos and Institute Butantan, et cetera. And so I was able to leverage a lot of those relationships and use them to capture information, among other things, and to kind of pilot various hypotheses. One of the things, so the Zika outbreak happened. It's, and you can trace its transmission down a major, there's a big harbor below Pernambuco, where it appears to have entered the country, perhaps in relationship to a canoe or a boat, paddled boat race.
Yeah, I read about that race. Yeah, I probably read one of your articles in researching this.
And then you could trace it, apparently, as you might expect, a big Navy port, there's a lot of sex workers, and you could trace it up to the coast where it really broke out in the barrios, along a major highway artery that goes south to north. So it was there. It did spread. The one of the uh, things that was observed was not only the microcephaly, but also various limb anomalies that were very analogous to those that were associated with thalidomide ingestion. And a one working hypothesis that people in public health officially in Brazil got particularly pissed off at me for publishing is that the Brazilian government uh, um, manufactured a lot of thalidomide and gave it out as a treatment for leprosy. It's like the cheap leprosy treatment, and leprosy is endemic in a lot of the indigenous people that kind of are continually emerging out of the Amazon and into those more industrial coastal regions because of forest and habitat destruction and job availability. So they form the bulk of the poor. And one of the cultural practices is that they will share medicines within their family units. And so what was happening, and does I suspect still happen, is the distribution of thalidomide became common into family units. And of course, the physician prescribing thalidomide would never prescribe thalidomide to someone who is pregnant or anticipating pregnancy, but
things happen.
surreptitiously, it would get shared within these family units.
Right.
And so you could have had, in general, you might have had some interaction between, if you think of Zika as an environmental toxin, and other, let's say, iatrogenic factors that could have given rise to some of those. And absolutely, you're correct that there was some anomalies in terms of measurements and defining standards.
Yeah, exactly right. Very good. I think I'd love to get your expert opinion on this, but obviously I'll have to wait for another episode. I have one I think one last question for you, because I was asked this question. I put my name into the MAHA, I guess, transition database nominee search.
Yeah,
I got an interview the other day, and I was
you
asked
did.
this question.
Well, you're ahead of me on that. So
Oh
congratulations.
well, I think you're past the interview stage. I think that it would be a matter of whether you'd want to leave the farm or something like that. I think they'd have to give you a much better offer than
So
have
they
to
interviewed you.
well, yeah, it seemed that way. Could have been a scheme or a scam, but I think it was real. And but the question I was asked was, would you ever support a vaccine mandate? That's a kind of broad question.
Well, that was a trial question for sure. That was putting you on the hot spot. How did you respond?
Well, I said, awaiting a zombie apocalypse virus, which I kind of mentioned, you can never say no to something that hasn't happened.
I think that's a good answer.
But basically, you have to kind of consider these as a matter of degree. Would I ever jump off my porch in my house? Well, it's on the second floor. I would probably break my hip. I mean, so no, the answer is no, I probably never will. Well, what if your house is on fire and, et cetera? So yes, you would. I mean, obviously in extreme situations, you would do something that you would never do. So the question, but for this particular, so going backwards in time, would I in 2020 have, or 2021 or whatever, done this? No, not for this. This was something that has a huge, like a 6 order of magnitude stratification and risk between a 9-year-old and a 90-year-old. Somebody who's healthy and somebody who's in a nursing home. Maybe talking about 10,000 to 100,000 fold risk, differential. And so no, that's not a vaccine mandate kind of thing, because I don't think the child's having a needless vaccine really does anything to impinge upon the nursing home. First of all, they don't interact that much. The 9-year-olds don't go to the nursing homes that much, A, and B, they're not going to go sick, and C, they didn't really get that ill to begin with, because everyone knew from Diamond Princess almost, ab initio, that there was nothing really there. There was no there for the great majority of the population. So, but that being said, if there was something that turned everyone to zombies instantly, if you had like aerosolized Ebola, I mean, who knows? It's like, so
That's a perfect example. I love that example. And by the way, that was the aerosolized Ebola was something that was floated by the physician at CIDRAP. I'm blanking on his name right now, and it caused a Pentagon threat assessment that came up with the answer of 1 billion people dead globally. That's precisely the example that I use is if you had a highly lethal virus like Ebola that was highly infectious, the way I put it was everybody would have lined up around the block for a crummy vaccine that was only 20% effective.
Mm-hmm.
But that, as you point out, that's not what we had. It sounds to me like you gave, I support your answer of pragmatism, but that's what you were probably being hit with was a litmus test of whether you were a full metal jacket anti-vaxxer.
Right.
Because they've taken the position that, which is a paradox, that Del Bigtree is leading this with Aaron Siri, and he's the one of the main factors in the vetting in the transition team selection, and you would if anybody in the world gets labeled as an anti-vaxxer, it's probably going to be Del Bigtree,
Mm-hmm.
depending on how you define the term, and yet he's written on Twitter that they really don't want to select people that are identified by the press as anti-vaxxers. So I think you were hit with a little litmus test trap,
Mm-hmm.
and from I'm not part of that. I'm not part of that vetting. And I haven't gone down to Mar-a-Lago and hung out with the very important people. But I think from everything I know that sounds like you gave the right answer, which was kind of a pragmatic one rather than a ideologic.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, it's a reverse litmus test too. If that's not the right answer for them, then I don't want. It's like Groucho Marx says, I would never join any club that would take the likes of me a member. Well, I wouldn't join any club that wouldn't take me the likes of me as a member either. So,
as far as I'm concerned, you gave the right answer.
Fair enough. Well, thank you so much, Doctor, and I appreciate it. And I'd love to have you back on again. Maybe I'll ship you a copy of my book.
Yeah,
and if it doesn't work out, you can feed it to the goats.
Or okay, no, we wouldn't do that. We've built quite a nice library now of books that have been shared with us during the COVID crisis. So it would go with those many others up in the house that we've rebuilt upstairs in the library.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, and I hope everyone enjoyed this. Please share it widely. You can find Dr. Malone on X. Obviously, there's his insignia, and mine is pretty much similar, except it's Randall Bach, MD, or no, Dr. Randall Bach. You'll find. Anyways, it's probably you're watching it through this anyway. So thank you so much. Have a great day.